Welcome to the Farm Policy Minute. I'm going to go through the provisions of the new seed cotton program and try to walk you through as much of the details we have right now. We are currently well on our way to having a decision aid that you could use to help you make these decisions if you're a producer that has generic base on their farms. So that will be coming in the next week or two at the most. And but today I'm just going to go through and kind of talk to you through the rules as we know them. So the first thing is first, for most of the coverage that people are familiar with is that have covered cotton lint in this country, and that we've had protections for cotton lint. And this plan is a little bit different. It is seed cotton, which is basically all the seed and all the cotton before ginning. So it refers to the unginned upland cotton that includes both lint and cottonseed. It will begin in the 2018 crop. Seed cotton is a covered commodity just as other crops and eligible for ARC or PLC coverage. Failure to elect either of those by whatever days are announced with FSA will get you price loss coverage. Now, I can tell you right now that most everyone thinks that producers will move towards price loss coverage in their selections. I very firmly believe that, but we will have the decision aid so that if you are in one of those counties that would it's going to be a unique situation, but if you're in one of those counties where ARC would be better for you to pick on this program, you're going to be able to tell from our decision aid. I tell producers, the seed cotton program, you're not worried about the lint price anymore. That's the price that's on that you follow as a futures price. But essentially, we're talking about the seed cotton price as a weighted average of lint and cottonseed prices, where the weights are the annual production of U.S. upland cotton lint and all U.S. all cottonseed. The reason why I'm stressing U.S. all cottonseed is that the data sources I'm going to talk about in a minute, there isn't such thing. There's not a USDA data series on just upland cottonseed. It's for all cottonseed, which would include extra long staple and others. Also, into this program, you're going to be able to update your old CCP lint yields using the same method as other crops were given in the 2014 Farm Bill. That lint yield from what was essentially from 2008 will then be multiplied by 2.4 to establish a seed cotton yield. As I'm going to go through in a few minutes, you're going to have the opportunity to use current data to increase that yield if you had higher yields. Beginning with the 2018 crop, generic base will be converted to seed cotton or other bases on the farm using specific rules. What does that mean? That means that since the 2014 Farm Bill was passed, the generic base that had been cotton base in the past was converted to generic, and you could plant on an annual basis whatever you wanted to on those acres. Now that is going to go away. There will no longer be generic base on farms, and that will be allocated to either seed cotton or other crops on your farm. Now, where does the data come from? The data basically comes from USDA NASS for prices of both cottonseed and lint and production. Those numbers, they basically report bales of cotton that will be converted to pounds of cotton, and they report tons of cottonseed production, which will need to be converted to pounds as well for the formula below. So anyone who's wanting to go out and calculate what's the market, what is a reasonable seed cotton price, here's the formula, and it's a weighted average of the two prices based on their production. You take the upland lint price times the upland lint production, you add that to the cottonseed price in pounds times cottonseed production in pounds, you divide that by total production in pounds, and that would be the price. We'll talk more about whether that's, a lot of people like to say, is that in the money, out of the money? And it's going to depend on the year relative to the reference price. So looking at the graph, the most recent 7 years of actual data, these are our calculations on what that blended price would be for seed cotton. The red line is the 36.7 cent per pound reference price, And you can see that for the early 4 years of the period, prices would have been above the reference prices. Wouldn't have been a payment for PLC. And the 3 years since that time, 14, 15, and 16, there would have been small payments under this program. Just like every other program, prices move up and down. Our decision aid will have the best information we can on where prices are going, and for both seed and lint. And so we will give you the best information we can, but again, the future is very uncertain, so you will never know for sure. So this is the most complicated part of the entire bill with regard to the seed, how you allocate those generic base acres to seed cotton or other covered commodities. There's a couple of cases, and I guess the first case you need to talk about is if you hadn't on your farm, you might have 3 or 4 farms, but on a certain farm, you have generic base allocated to it, but on that farm you have not planted any covered commodity from 2009 to 2016. It essentially creates a category of unassigned crop base, and for that particular farm, that generic base will no longer be getting payments of any type. That is if you hadn't farmed any covered commodity on that farm during that time period, 09 to 16. So that's going to be very an unusual situation. The more common situation is you have planted a covered commodity on that farm during that time period. So under that situation, you've got 2 options. The first option is the owner shall allocate generic base equal to the greater of 80% of generic base on the farm. So if you had 1,000 acres of generic base, 80% of that's 800 acres. Or the average number of seed cotton acres planted or prevented planting during the 09 to 12 crop years not to exceed total generic base acres on the farm. Any unconverted generic base acres become unassigned crop base and ineligible for ARC/PLC. So what does that mean? It means under option 1, it's either 80% of the total generic or the average of the 09 to 12 period. Certainly not real complicated. You're going to know probably offhand. We have that in our decision aid, but that's a pretty easy choice, and you get the higher of that. Or there's a second option, and this is for people who, while they have planted cotton in their distant past, they had cotton base, but they've probably moved on to other commodities. So option 2 is for those people who would like to allocate those generic acres to possibly seed cotton, but many other things as well. And I've got a couple of examples that'll show you what that means. Again, if you don't select, if the producer fails to select, they will get the first option, which is the higher of the 80% or the 4-year average. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the most difficult decision producers are going to face is how to allocate those generic base acres. This example shows a farm with 1,000 acres, and on that farm they had 600 acres of cotton base prior to the 2014 Farm Bill. In that bill, it became 600 acres of generic base. The 09 to 12 planted acres are listed there in blue for each of cotton, corn, wheat, and sorghum. That is what's going to help you allocate things for option 2. So option 1, if you can take that 600 acres of generic base, you get 80% of it. 600 times 80% is 480 acres. That's pretty straightforward. The 09 to 12 average planted acres of cotton was 400, and so you have a situation where under option 1 you'd be going with 480, or you can choose option 2, and you can take the 600 generic and allocate it based on the shares of the total acres during that time period. So, for example, seed cotton would say 600 times 400 divided by 1,000, or 240 acres. Same for corn, same for wheat. You're just allocating 600 acres of generic based on what you planted during that time period. So at the end of the day, a producer would have to decide, do I want to have that 600 generic base acres allocated to other crops, or primarily allocated to cotton in the new seed cotton program. And so if they chose option 1, it's 400. It's pretty simple. That's the higher of. It's 480 acres of seed cotton. No further decisions. If they think they might want to go with option 2, then they would end up converting 600 acres of generic to 240 acres of seed cotton base. And then they would have 180 acres of generic that has been converted to corn base, in addition to the pre-existing 200 acres of corn base, so 380. So there's a couple of decisions there. We're going to run through that for you. If you want to use our decision aid, it'll make all the calculations. You'll be able to make the choice. Again, it's farm by farm. You can make different choices on different farms. Here's another example. This one in particular I wanted to show for somebody who hadn't been planting cotton during that time period, which is the case across a lot of the Mid-South. In that particular case, the higher of option is still 480. But when you do the option 2, you'd be allocating all those 600 acres of generic base to other crops. So instead of, on my previous example of corn having 240 that had been allocated, their total base on that farm of corn is going to be 240 plus the initial 200 that they started with. So 440 acres of corn base, and so on for the other crops. You can get into some wild examples. I'm going to do more as we go forward. They'll be on our website, but frankly, this is how it's going to work, and this is the toughest part of the whole decision-making process, I believe. Some other provisions, the updating of the yields, as I said earlier, the old CCP yield from 2008 Farm Bill, or the updated 90% of the 2008 to 12 simple average. You take that, whichever one's higher, and you multiply it times 2.4 to put it on a seed cotton basis, and that would be your new yield. Obviously, just like in the 2014 Farm Bill, there is a chance to plug with the county average, and any year that you didn't plant cotton during that time frame of 2008 to 12 isn't included in the average. So it's one of the things I forgot to say early on is the leadership basically made a big point in this seed cotton program, to go with the rules that were in place for pretty much every other commodity that was developed in the 2014 Farm Bill. So it's from that respect, if you remember those rules, you're going to be very comfortable with these decisions. One other question people ask is what is the relationship with this new program and the STAX program? Well, one of the ways that they were able to fund this program is that they are using the money from the STAX program that was in the baseline. So how this is going to work is for 2018, because you will have already made your insurance decisions prior to signing up, more than likely, for 2018 only, you could have both ARC or PLC, whichever one you choose, and STAX on a given farm. After 2018, it's going to be an annual decision. Whichever one you picked, ARC or PLC, it's either that choice or STAX on a farm-by-farm basis for any farm that you have seed cotton base. It's pretty important to know that on one farm, you might pick to go with PLC for seed cotton. On another farm, you may choose to go with STAX. And in fact, the way the prices have been moving, I think we will have this included in our decision aid, because frankly, as we go out through time, the STAX program gets more favorable than it has been in the past. Kind of to wrap up, the price loss coverage reference price, as I had on the graph, is 36.7 cents per pound, and it's going to be flat, and we'll see if you know the way that the equation works for calculating payments. We're going to go through next time, but a lot of people have asked. They saw in the statute that there was a 25 cent per pound loan rate for seed cotton, and it only comes into play because in the price loss coverage calculation, there's a floor of 25 cents. So you're going to be getting paid in between 36.7 and 25 cents when the seed cotton prices actually fall below those levels. Not a big deal. I just wanted to make sure you're not getting confused on that factor. So with regard to future videos, the next time I'm going to go through some examples of how PLC would be calculated for seed cotton, and then I'm going to go through some examples of how ARC would work, our county would work for seed cotton, and then following up with that, I'm going to be going through a series of videos working out the details of what the changes on the dairy program mean for producers. Until next time, thank you.